Logical fallacies are things that many people do on accident. And oftentimes we use them or see them regularly throughout our experiences and fail to recognize that they are actually a logical fallacy. So what is a logical fallacy? Essentially, what it means is it's an error in reasoning. And there are a number of different fallacies. Here, I just want to give you some of the ones that I most commonly see in public speaking, specifically in persuasive speeches. So let's take a look at these here. The first one would be considered a red herring. And a red herring is basically introducing irrelevant issues to divert the attention of your audience. So if you are unfamiliar with your concepts or you feel kind of hesitant about them, you might choose to use a red herring. And I often think of this as looking at a fish in water, a herring specifically, looking at a fish in water and trying to focus my attention on the clear water, and that fish sort of darts off in another direction and my attention is diverted. That makes me think, when I hear the term red herring, that's what I see, and it sort of fits the nature of this topic. If you have ever watched a political campaign, it might be something like, during a debate, somebody says, "Tell me how you feel or what you would do with the healthcare reform," and the candidate would instead say, "Oh yes, healthcare reform is important. However, even more important is our educational system." And then boom, they're off in the direction of their educational system. That's very certainly a logical fallacy, an error in the way they are reasoning their argument. Another one is ad hominem, which substitutes an attack on the person. Again, you unfortunately see this quite a bit in political campaigns where someone will attack the other person. Don't vote for so-and-so because they are they cheated on their husband or they did all these things, and you give very negative physical, emotional, characteristic-based information about that person in order to discredit them. While that does happen and some kind of discrediting may be important, it shouldn't be your only way of getting information across. You want to make sure that you have actual logic. And if the discreditation of that person comes into play and is necessary, then okay, that's something to pull in there. But it should not be the basis of your argument against that side, against your opponent. Another is either or, where you say it's all black and white, nothing in the middle, or other additional views. So, for example, it might be we either need to do a capitalistic healthcare reform or we do a single-payer system. Those are the only two options. There's nothing else. Now, that may be the case. Maybe those are two of the only options, but either or says there is nothing else. Another example would be you can either take your children to public school or private school. While that may be the case for many people, there's also the option of virtual school or online education, as well as homeschooling and other formats. So there's not an either or in this. Most of the time we think of these in terms of extremes. This particular opponent always does this or never does that. You must like them or hate them, one of the two. So that would be considered either or. Bandwagon is the next one. This happens a lot in advertisement and marketing. So it's an argument that uses general opinion as its basis. 4 out of 5 dentists recommend Sensodyne or whatever it might be. It's saying general opinion is. The vast majority of people say. Now, the dentist one, I think you could go both ways because they're considered experts. But for example, Apple. If you say, look at all the people that have Apple phones. If all these people have Apple phones, that must mean that Apple phones are the best. Is that true? Not necessarily. That's a bandwagon argument. You're jumping on the bandwagon because everybody is doing it or everybody believes this thing to be true, therefore it must be true. Not the case at all. Not the case at all. And then finally, slippery slope. This assumes that taking a first step will lead inevitably to a second step and soon down the slope to disaster. So it's basically saying if you don't make this choice or if you make this choice, these bad things are going to happen. And this happens a lot when we talk about extreme cases. When you use extreme cases in your speeches or your papers, those are fine. They just need to be highlighted as an extreme case. When you only use extreme cases, then it's basically a slippery slope argument. Anything that says if you don't do this one thing, everything's going to fall apart. You're going to head directly down this path, when that's not necessarily the case for most things. So those are your logical fallacies, and should kind of give you a couple of things to be wary of when you are making arguments or listening to them. And hopefully you will be able to monitor yourself and other speakers for these types of arguments, and hopefully be successful in the end by giving a very logical argument not filled with fallacies.